right, welcome to Sunday School, boys and girls. I'm glad to have you with us this morning. And I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had to do something that you knew was going to make a lot of people pretty mad and you didn't want to do it? Well, that's what Gideon had to do, as we're going to hear from his story today. So we're still talking about the Israelites, and they are in the promised land, and they've been going through this cycle where they do the things that God says for a while, and then they don't do what God says for a while. And then they get in trouble, and they cry out to God, and God sends them a rescuer called a judge to fight against their enemies and bring them back to safety. So this story happens when the Israelites have not been doing what God wants again, and they've gotten into trouble. A group of people named the Midianites are attacking them and stealing all their food. And the Israelites have become so poor and so hungry after all these attacks, they finally cried out to God again to save them. And God sent some prophets to Israel to tell them that they have not been obeying God because they have been worshiping idols. And that's why these things were happening to them. And at this time, an angel of the Lord came to Gideon. And Gideon was trying to get as much food as he could, threshing his wheat, what little bit of wheat his family had left. He was threshing it in a hidden spot so that the Midianites couldn't steal it. But he couldn't hide from God because the angel of the Lord found him. And in the book of Judges, we're still reading in the book of Judges, chapter 6, verse 12, it tells us, the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon. He said, "Mighty warrior, the Lord is with you." Well, Gideon didn't seem too impressed that an angel was speaking to him. He answered back, "If the Lord is with us, as you say, then why has all this happened to us? Where are all the miracles that God used to do? Why has God abandoned us?" And the angel replied, "Go in the strength that you have and save Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you. God is sending you." And Gideon said, "But Lord, how can I save Israel? I am from the weakest family, and I am the least important person in my family." But the Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will defeat the Midianites." So Gideon went to get some food for his visitor because he was being very hospitable. That's what the Israelites were very good at. So he got some food and he brought it back to the angel, and the angel just reached out with a stick. And all of a sudden, all of the food just burst into flame and it burned up right in front of Gideon's eyes. Well, that got his attention. He was pretty impressed at that. And he finally realized he really was speaking with an angel of the Lord. So Gideon made an altar to worship God. And the angel told Gideon to go to his family's house because even Gideon's family had not been worshiping God the way they should. And they had idols. Idols at that time were like little statues that they would worship, and they thought those idols were some kind of god that could save them and do things for them. But of course, they weren't really gods. They were false gods. And Gideon's family had some of these, and so Gideon had to go and destroy all of those idols, and he knew that was going to make his family very upset. And all the other people of the village were going to be very upset as well because they thought it was going to offend those gods that they thought they were worshiping. But Gideon did what he was supposed to do, except instead of doing it in the daytime when everyone could see him, he did it at night, thinking maybe no one would notice. But they did, and in the morning they came to find Gideon, and they were ready to kill him. And in Judges chapter 6, still verse 31 now, it tells us that Joash, that's Gideon's father, replied to the angry crowd around him. He said, "Are you going to stand up for Baal?" That's the idol, the false god. "Are you trying to save him? Those who stand up for him will be put to death by morning. Is Baal really a god? If he is, he can stand up for himself when someone tears down his altar. And so Gideon's father did a good thing. His mind was starting to be changed to want to worship God instead of their idols and Baal. So meanwhile, the Midianites that wanted to attack Israel had put together a big army with some other groups, and they were coming to fight Israel. So God told Gideon to gather a huge army of all the Israelites and get ready to fight. But Gideon was not feeling very confident. And he asked God for a sign, some kind of proof that God was going to do what he said. So Gideon asked God that if he put a piece of wool on the ground overnight, and if the wool was wet, but the ground stayed dry in the morning, then Gideon would know that God had promised to do this for him. And guess what? In the morning, it was just like Gideon asked for. The wool was wet and the ground was dry. But Gideon, he just needed a little bit more proof. He just wasn't convinced yet. And so he said, okay, this time I'll put the wool on the ground, and the wool should be dry, but the ground should be wet. And guess what? That's what happened. God did it. And finally, Gideon had enough confidence that he was ready to go do this. So Gideon led out the Israelite army, and he was getting ready to go fight the Midianites. But God said, wait, you have too many soldiers in your army. It was so many soldiers that they would have easily defeated the Midianites, and God wouldn't have gotten the credit. They would have thought that it was their own strength that had defeated the Midianites instead of God's strength. And God wanted them to really, really, really understand that he was the one true God. And so he told Gideon, okay, send home every man who is afraid and who doesn't really want to fight. And guess what? A lot of them left. Thousands of them said, okay, I'll check out, tag, I'm done. And they went home. But then God said, wait, there's still too many men. I still am not going to get the credit for defeating the Midianites. So God told Gideon to take the soldiers down to drink from a stream of water that was flowing. And God said that all the ones who knelt down to drink, and they put their face in the water instead of using their hands to scoop it up, he said all of those who put their head down to get a drink, they should go home. And Gideon said, okay. So all of those guys went home. Well, Gideon was only left with 300 men in his army. And Gideon was very confused at this point. He said, how are we going to defeat the Midianites with only 300 men? But God said, that's okay. I'm going to do it for you. Now you are ready to fight and ready to prove that I am God. So God gave Gideon a plan of how to attack the Midianites. And it was a very unusual plan. We find that in chapter 7, Judges chapter 7, verses 16 to 18. Gideon separated the 300 men into 3 fighting groups. He put a trumpet and an empty jar into the hands of each man, and he put a torch inside every jar. Watch me, he told them. Do what I do. I'll go to the edge of the enemy camp, then do exactly as I do. I and everyone with me will blow our trumpets, and then you blow your trumpets from your positions all around, and shout out the battle cry for the Lord and for Gideon. And so that's what they did. Gideon took his group, and the other 2 groups were around the army in different places, and they blew their trumpets, and they broke their jars, and they shouted for the Lord and for Gideon. And what happened? They woke up those Midianites who were sleeping, and the Midianites started running around crazy and screaming. They didn't know what was going on. And God put a confusion on those Midianite soldiers so that they started fighting against each other. They didn't know who to fight. And the Israelite army was able to chase them all away and gain back the territory that they had lost to the Midianites. And there was no question that this 300-man army had not been able to defeat the Midianites by themselves, but that God had been the one who caused Gideon to win this battle. So let's remember that story whenever we have to do something that seems like it's going to take a lot of strength and courage, and we don't have that much strength and courage. We can always depend on God to give us that courage, especially when we're obeying Him. He wants us to obey Him, even when it's hard and even when it's going to be challenging and the people around us aren't going to want to do it with us. God will give us the courage and strength to do the right thing. And I hope you will turn to God whenever you need that courage. All right, we'll come back again next week for another story. I hope you have a good week.